everyone, welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Today we've got a really fun, simple scrap granny square for you. It's a simple scrap square. In fact, 4 rows of this square not only makes a 5.5-inch square, but it takes up less than 10 yards of yarn in total. So if you've got tiny little bits of yarn left over from other projects, you don't have to toss them out, you don't have to use them as stuffing, you can actually turn them into really cute little squares. And this fun mesh style makes it a nice lacy motif for lighter weight blankets, or if you're using cotton, you could stitch a few into a cover-up for the sun. There's a lot of uses for a square motif, and this one is nice and lightweight. For a 4-round granny square, measuring around 5.5 inches across or 13 centimeters. You want 10 yards of yarn. You can mix that together. It can be all one color. I'm going to show you how to change colors at least once today. You're going to want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and we want to keep track of our 4 corner spaces. So a couple 4 stitch markers or little clips would be very handy for doing this tutorial. And you can use any hook you want. I'm using a 5.5mm hook. This is also known as an I or a 9 in the US, a 5 in the UK. And the yarn I've chosen today is a size 4 medium weight yarn in acrylic. So just for demonstration purposes, that's what I'm using. And once you've got all that together, we can make ourselves a square.
Easily find all of our crochet tutorials. Type youtube.com/JaydaInStitches into your web browser and we'll see you there.
We're going to start with the center like we do with most granny squares. And we're going to start with a slip knot on our hook. We're going to chain 5 to begin. And we're making a ring to work into. So we're going to take our hook and put it into the first chain we made, slip stitch to join. There we go. A little tight. You should have a ring that fits over the tip of your finger, and this is where we're going to build row or round 1 into. I'm just going to work over my short tail, but of course you can leave it out the back and weave it in later. Every row in this little scrap granny starts with a chain 5. A chain 5 at the beginning of a row counts as a double crochet, chain 2. So every row begins with a chain 5. It counts as double crochet, chain 2. Into our little ring, we are going to double crochet and chain 2. And we're going to repeat that 6 more times. So double crochet, all right into that little ring, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2. You're going to repeat that a couple more times. What we're going for is to have 8 double crochet, and remember your chain 5 count, so we've done chain 5 and then 1, 2, 3, 4 so far together. You're going to do 3 more double crochet, chain 2, and I'll catch up with you at the end of round 1. At the end of round 1, you should have 8 double crochet, chain 2. Remember, your chain 5 that begins counts as a double crochet, chain 2. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Don't forget those chain 2 at the very end, because you want to make sure you've got 8 chain 2 spaces. You're going to find the 3rd chain on that chain 5 that you began with. So this sort of would be like slip stitching into the top of a double crochet, but we're slip stitching into that 3rd chain. And now row 1 looks like this. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to mark off all of our little corners. So right from where you joined, the very next chain 2 space is going to be a corner. So you're going to put a marker or a clip right there. You're going to skip the next chain 2 space and you're going to clip or mark the chain 2 space after that. You're going to skip the next chain 2 space and you're going to mark the chain 2 space after that one. And I'm going to do this from the other side here. Then you're going to skip the next chain 2 space and mark the one after that. So you're evenly distributing 4 stitch markers or clips all the way around, and you're marking off 4 of those corners, or those equal chain 2 spaces, to be your corners. So row 1, everything's the same. You've got 8 quote double crochets and 8 chain 2 spaces, and you want to mark off the 4 corners. Here we go for round 2. I'm just going to make sure I'm not clipping my yarn here. Right where you are, so you joined at the top of that chain 3, you're going to chain 5, because every row begins with a chain 5, and that chain 5 counts as a double crochet chain 2. We are approaching a corner, so this double crochet chain 2, remember our chain 5 counts as that, is sitting right on top of our other chain 3, which counts as a double crochet. So I want you to see it sitting directly on top of that stitch. When you get to a marked corner space, you work double crochet into the space, chain 2, and double crochet into the space. Before you finish, chain 2 more. So think double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2 as you work this square, because that's essentially what the entire square is built of. Double crochet, chain 2. Before you leave, you're going to want to just mark that corner so you can keep track of it, because there are a lot of chain 2 spaces on this little project. So you're going to mark that corner space, and you can see that it sits directly out from the corner space that we just worked into. Now, here's the fun thing about this square. Every single stitch, or in this case, every single double crochet, gets worked into. So we only pay attention to the corner spaces, but unlike a regular granny square, we ignore all the spaces in between. Instead, we're going to use the stitches. So the second you finish with a corner, immediately into that stitch right next to it, you're going to work double crochet, chain 2. Skip that space. There's no marker in it, so you know you can skip it. Next thing you get to is a stitch, and into that stitch, we're going to work double crochet, chain 2. Now I'm using big clips, so for the first row they are a little bit cumbersome. If you're using smaller things like safety pins, they won't be so much in the way, but of course as your square gets bigger they won't be quite so clumsy or in the way, but I feel like this is really helpful to show where those corners are. So we've worked double crochet, chain 2 into that stitch, and now we're at a clip, which means we're dealing with a corner space. So we want to address the corner space. Into that corner space we're going to work a double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2. And of course we've just created a space that's going to be the corner for row 2. So I'm just going to put a clip back on that space before I leave, because I don't want to lose track of it. So here we've built out now. We've got a new corner space here. We've worked double crochet, chain 2 into each of those stitches. We got to the corner space, we worked double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, which creates the new corner, and chain 2 before we leave. And now we're going to do the same thing around the rest of the square. So we come to a stitch. Into that stitch, every single stitch gets worked into. Double crochet, chain 2. We skip that space because there's no clip in it, so we know it's not a corner space, so we ignore it. We go right to the next stitch instead, and we work double crochet, chain 2. And I am working around my big clips, but I do find they help mark out my squares. I'm definitely not missing the fact that that's a corner. So after that stitch, we've come to another corner. I'm going to remove my clip, and into the corner you work double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, all into the same corner space, and chain 2. So it's always double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2. That's always what you're doing. I'm going to mark that new space that I've just created, new corner space, before I leave so I can keep track of it. And that leaves me with 2 more sides. So into each stitch I work double crochet, chain 2, I skip this unmarked space, double crochet, chain 2 into the next stitch. That brings me up to my last stitch marker. Into that corner space, right where that marker's sitting, I work double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2 into that space. That brings me to my last side. I'm going to work double crochet, chain 2 into that stitch, and that will bring me right up to where I started. So I'm going to let you work away at that, and I'll catch up with you at the end of round 2. At the end of round 2, I've worked my last double crochet, chain 2, double crochet into the corner space, and I've remarked that last space. And of course, right into that next stitch, I worked double crochet, chain 2. And then this space gets skipped because there's no clip in it. That brings me back to where we started with a double crochet, chain 5, or I should say chain 5, which counts as a double crochet, chain 2. I chained my last 2, make sure you don't forget those last 2 chains, and then find the third chain up on that chain 5 that you began with and join with a slip stitch. And that is 2 full rounds of the granny square. I'm going to snip my yarn, drop my hook and snip my yarn. I'm going to snip my yarn and I'm going to change colors now. So if you were going to continue with the same color, you would just continue from where you are. So you would chain 5 and continue. But if you're changing colors, I'm going to weave that tail in later, I like to join in a chain 2 space. So you don't have to, you could continue from here, chain 5, that counts as a double crochet, chain 2, and the next thing you would come to, so you're skipping a space because it's not marked, the next thing you would come to is a stitch, so you'd work double crochet, chain 2 into that stitch, and then you would address your corner. But I'm going to start in the corner because I'm changing colors. So I'm going to grab my pink now. I'm going to start with a slip knot. I'm going to take out my little clip. Into my corner space, I'm going to join with a slip stitch. And this is just for changing colors. I just like to start in a corner space because I feel like starting in a corner just helps me remember where I am. Every row begins with a chain 5. That counts as a double crochet, chain 2. Because we're in a corner space, we want to work double crochet, chain 2. And before I leave, I'm going to mark my new corner with my stitch marker. And now I'm working across a side. So remember, in this pattern, every single stitch gets worked into. Not necessarily the spaces. I'm ignoring the spaces unless there's an actual clip in it that tells me it's a corner space. So only corner spaces get worked into, but every single stitch does get worked into. So I come to the first stitch, which is right after the little corner that I just worked in. I'm going to work a double crochet, chain 2 into the top of that stitch. Skip that space because there's no marker. Go to the next stitch, double crochet, chain 2. Skip that space because there's no marker. Go to the next stitch. Double crochet, chain 2. There's another space I'm skipping because there's no marker. Go to the next stitch. And right into the top of it, double crochet, chain 2. So double crochet, chain 2 into every single stitch, no exceptions. When you get to a marked corner, this is why it's really handy to use these stitch markers, you actually use the corner space. So double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, all worked into the corner space. And before you leave, grab your stitch marker and mark that space out again, just so it's easy to keep track. And off we go again. We work into every single stitch, so don't skip a stitch. Even though you've just worked into the corner space right next to it, do not skip that stitch. So double crochet, chain 2 into every single stitch, no exceptions, every single row. So double crochet, chain 2, that's what you've got in your head. You're working that into the top of every single stitch, all the way across every single side of your square, no exceptions. The only time you trouble yourself with a space is when you get to a marked corner, which is why we're marking them. It's easy to keep track of them. You can see with all these chain 2 spaces how it could be easy to lose track of your corners. So I've worked that stitch. Here I am in a corner space. I'm going to take my marker out, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, all into the corner space. And before I leave, I mark that new space with my stitch marker. And that's that! Double crochet, chain 2 into every single stitch, no exceptions. Double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2 into the corner space. Remark your new space with your marker. Double crochet, chain 2 into every single stitch. And that includes the top of this chain 3. And when we finish, we'll be over here by the corner. So I'm going to let you work away at row 3 by yourself, or round 3, however you want to call it. And I'll see you at the end. As you finish round 3, or any round for that matter, when you get to the end, so we started with a new color in the corner, so don't forget to work into the top of that last stitch. Remember, every single stitch gets double crochet, chain 2, absolutely no exceptions. Then, because we joined here, I'm back to the chain 5 that began the row. It doesn't matter what row you're on or where you started, when you get back around to that chain 5, you find the third chain and you slip stitch in it to finish off the row. Now I'm just going to put my clip back in there for a second. And I'm going to take my hook out and I'm going to lay it flat, and I'm going to carefully put my thumbs and fingers into my corner spaces that are marked, and I'm going to pull it out so that you can sort of see how that square shapes up. So the more rows you do, the easier it is to see the square, but I highly recommend always marking your corners because it helps you move a little faster. You don't have to sort of guess what chain 2 space you're on because you're only ever working into the corner spaces. You're not dealing with any of the spaces along the sides. You're only working into the stitches. So we're going to do one more row together, and if you're going to make this square larger, you would just keep repeating the concept of this row. If you want to change colors, I recommend joining in a corner space because that's kind of easy to keep track of. But if you're not changing colors, anywhere you join a row, so you will always join a row on the third chain of the chain 5. It doesn't matter where that chain 5 was. You always chain 5 to begin. And of course that counts as a double crochet, chain 2, and it's sitting on top of that double crochet stitch from the previous row. But the next thing we do is a marked corner. So we're going to work double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2 into that corner space. And before we leave, because we've got so many chain 2 spaces going, we're going to make sure we mark that space so we don't lose track of it. And just like the previous row, you work a double crochet, chain 2 into every single stitch. No exceptions. Don't miss one. If you miss one, it will throw off the side and eventually your whole square. So make sure until you get comfortable with the little double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, you pay very close attention to every single stitch to make sure you're not missing any. Always double crochet, chain 2. I got one more before I get to my corner. See, I don't want to miss it. And right into the top. It's very easy to go quickly here, so it's very easy to kind of miss where you're at, which is why I recommend marking out those corners. Into every single corner space, there's only 4 per row, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2. So you do it twice in the corner space. Before you leave, mark your corner. Ba-ba! And then make sure you don't miss any of those stitches. Double crochet, chain 2 into the top every single one. And I will let you work away at round 4, and I will catch up with you at the end. When you get back around to the end of every single row, no matter where it started, it will always be your chain 5. So it doesn't matter where it started but when you get back to that chain 5, make sure you've worked double crochet chain 2 into your last stitch, and then find the 3rd chain on that chain 5 and just join with a slip stitch. Now that is 4 rows of the square. That goes really quickly. It doesn't use up very much yarn. You can keep going if you want, but these are nice small little motifs that you can work into a lot of blankets. And because we're just dealing with scraps, you might not have a whole lot of a particular color left over. So it's nice to have a small square. I'm going to carefully take out all of my clips before I weave in my tails. And I'm going to put my fingers and my thumbs in those 4 corners. I'm going to pull it out so you can really see that square shape. That is such a neat little motif. And of course, if you're going to block them, or I would sew them all together before I blocked them, but you can block them if you're having trouble seeing where your corners are. Or you can sort of put some pegs on a pegboard and sort of slip them over top on, put your corner spaces through those pegs just to sort of help keep them stretched out. So when you do go to use them, you can easily see where those corners are. But of course, the bigger your square gets, the easier it is to see where those corners are. To weave in your ends, because we're dealing with a mesh pattern, I like to try to mix, keep my colors, my same color with my same color. So I'm going to just weave in this little orange tail here towards the middle. I'm going to take it down the back of a stitch. And then I'm just going to weave it underneath the loops of some of these stitches all the way around that, which was row 2. So I'm going to bring my needle underneath some of those stitches. Make sure I'm not pulling it out of alignment, and then I'm just going to double back through some of those stitches and loops and just pull the rest of that tail in. And I've got my little tiny tail here from the beginning. Same thing. I was working over top of it, so I'm just going to double back through a handful of stitches and weave that in. I find weaving your tail in back and forth a couple times helps it stay put, especially if your stitches are nice and tight. Here's another little tail. I'm just going to kind of, I guess I can go forwards. Actually, no, I want to keep it with the same color. So I'm going to bring it up a row. So I'm just going to weave it up through the back of a stitch. There we go. And then I will weave it in underneath some of the loops and stitches along that row. That's a short little tail, but I'm not too worried about it coming out. And that's all you have to do to weave in your tails on a mesh fabric. Up here at the top, this one's the easy one. I'm going to bring it down the back of a stitch. So down the back of a stitch, and then I'm just going to weave it in underneath some of the loops and stitches of that last row, row 4. And I want to make sure that I don't pull it out of alignment. And I will double back on some of those stitches. And after I've woven in tails, I always like to re-stretch out my square just to make sure that I haven't sort of lost the corners or the overall shape of it. There we go. Corner, 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 and tug. And there we go. So that is a simple and fun and relatively fast little scrap square using a mesh stitch, something really simple. It's a fun open take on a traditional granny square, and it's a great way to use up your scraps. You can whip up a whole pile of these in no time flat and make yourself a really unique and lacy looking blanket, among other things. We hope you enjoyed making this little scrap square along with us today, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye!
Hi everyone, this is Mama InStitches. Thank you for watching. Here are a few other videos you might enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can also click the like button and the bell. Thank you, have a wonderful day.